So I want you to imagine a moment in history where two just completely bitter rivals finally have this real chance to reset their relationship.
Right.
Like the window opens, they have the opportunity, but then they just completely miss it. The window slams shut.
Yeah, which is unfortunately a pretty common theme in geopolitics.
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive. Today we are pulling from a really comprehensive historical dossier that tracks the entire timeline of U.S.-Iran relations.
And it's a very long timeline.
Very long. But our mission for this deep dive is to zero in on, well, one specific window. We're looking at the 1990s, so roughly from 1989 up to 2001.
Right.
Because it's just this fascinating era of contradictions. You've got sweeping American sanctions on one side and then totally out of nowhere, this surprising reformist overture from Iran on the other. And we're going to look at the tragic question of why, a thaw and rhetoric just couldn't translate into actual real diplomacy.
Yeah, and to really set the tone for this, to understand the gravity of that missed opening, I think it helps to contrast the 90s with the decades right before it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, earlier decades in U.S.-Iran relations are defined by these massive, explosive events. Like, you have the 1953 CIA-backed coup.
Right.
And then the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which was just entirely transformative, followed immediately by the hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy.
Your 444-day crisis, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what everyone remembers.
Exactly. And then the 80s were all about covert coups, proxy conflicts, arms deals. But the 1990s are defined by something much quieter.
Quieter, but I'd argue like equally profound.
Oh, definitely. It's an era of structural containment. The overt violence kind of fades into these deep institutionalized standoffs.
So to really unpack the architecture of that standoff, we have to start in 1989, because that's a huge pivot point. Ayatollah Khomeini, the architect of the revolution, dies.
Right.
And if you're just reading this on paper, you'd think, okay, the founding revolutionary figure is gone. The original antagonist is off the board. This is the moment for a diplomatic reset.
You would think so, yeah.
But Washington's reaction wasn't to reach out at all. They actually isolated Iran even further.
They did. And to get the why behind that, you have to look at the institutional psychology in Washington at that exact moment. The 80s were just deeply traumatic for American foreign policy in the Middle East.
Right, because of the embassy hostages.
That was huge, yeah. That was a defining memory for an entire generation of politicians. But there was also the tanker war in the late 80s.
Oh, right, during the Iran-Iraq War.
Exactly. The conflict spilled into the Persian Gulf. Iranian forces were mining international waters, and the U.S. actually sent the Navy to escort oil tankers.
Which led to actual fighting.
Right, yeah. Direct naval clashes, real violence between American warships and Iranian forces. So, when Khomeini dies in '89, Washington isn't looking at Iran as some potential post-Cold War partner. They're looking at a military adversary that had just recently put American personnel in direct danger. So the safest strategy in their minds was maximum distance.
Maximum distance and maximum economic pressure.
Yeah.
Which leads us to this policy the dossier calls dual containment. This was officially adopted under the Clinton administration.
Right.
And when I was reading this part, I was trying to visualize it. And it feels like a neighborhood dispute. Like, imagine you have two highly disruptive neighbors.
Okay.
Instead of trying to play them against each other, you just decide, I'm going to spend all my time and money to simultaneously board up both of their houses at the exact same time. Like Iran and Iraq.
That's a great analogy, actually, because in geopolitics, the standard move is balancing.
Right, playing one off the other.
Exactly. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s, the U.S. gave varying levels of support to Iraq, specifically to keep Iran from dominating the region.
Yeah.
But by the early 90s, the Clinton administration just pivots entirely. They decide Saddam Hussein and the post-Khomeini leadership are both inherent threats.
So they just try to put them both in a box.
A very tight, very expensive strategic box.
But boarding up two houses takes a ton of material. How did Washington actually do this? Because, containment isn't just a piece of paper.
No, it requires a massive footprint. Militarily, it meant keeping huge naval and air forces in the Gulf. But the real mechanism, especially against Iran, was economic boxing in.
Starving them of cash.
Basically, yeah. They weaponized the sheer weight of the American economy. They wanted to cut off the hard currency Iran needed to modernize its infrastructure, specifically oil.
Because oil is everything for their economy.
Exactly.
And the escalation of this is wild. Because in 1995, Clinton imposes a total trade and investment embargo.
Right.
American companies are just totally banned from doing business in Iran. But then, And this is the part that really surprised me. In 1996, they passed the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act.
Oh, I'll say, yeah, that was a massive turning point.
Because it didn't just target American companies, right?
No, the 1995 embargo already took care of the American side. The 1996 Act was designed to penalize foreign investments.
Wait, okay. Foreign.
Yes.
So let me get this straight. If I'm like the CEO of a French energy company acting totally legally in France, Washington could penalize me for doing business with Iran.
They absolutely could. The act targeted anyone investing more than $40 million, and later it was dropped to $20 million in Iran's energy sector.
That seems like a huge overreach. Didn't Europe just lose their minds over this?
Oh, they were furious. European capitals saw it as this blatant extraterritorial violation of free trade.
I mean, it kind of is.
Well, yeah, but Washington wasn't relying on international law. They were relying on gravity. They were basically issuing this ultimatum to the corporate world saying, you can invest in Iranian oil or you can have access to the U.S. financial system. You pick.
Wow. And you can't have both.
You cannot have both.
And obviously, if you're a global bank or an oil company, getting locked out of the U.S. market is corporate suicide.
Precisely. So even though European governments were protesting politically, the companies themselves had to comply. The risk was just too high.
So by 1996, Washington has built this, like, impenetrable economic wall around the country.
A very successful, albeit controversial, economic cage.
So if you're listening, you might be wondering, well, what does that do to a country? Does that much financial pressure make a nation more extreme? Or does it make them want to change?
That's the core question.
Right. And when we hit 1997 to the timeline, there's this really sharp plot twist.
Yeah, there is a profound internal reckoning in Iran because you have this intense economic squeeze, plus a lot of domestic anger over social restrictions.
Especially from the younger generation.
Yes, exactly. The youth and the middle class were hungry for reform. And it showed up at the ballot box in a way that truly shocked the world.
The 1997 presidential election, Mohammad Khatami wins.
The reformist president.
And this is where the disconnect is just so jarring. Because Washington just spent 5 years treating Iran like this irredeemable monster, building up this massive economic fortress.
Right.
And suddenly the Iranian people elect a guy who genuinely wants to, like, turn the temperature down.
The contrast was just staggering. I mean, for nearly 20 years, the rhetoric from Tehran was just completely fiery, deeply anti-American.
The whole great Satan thing.
Exactly. That was just the baseline of their political speech. And then Khatami arrives and totally flips the script. He doesn't threaten the West. He starts calling for a dialogue among civilizations.
Dialogue among civilizations. I mean, what a beautifully philosophical phrase, especially compared to Clinton signing these brutal extraterritorial sanctions.
Yeah, the juxtaposition is crazy.
What did Khatami actually mean by that, though, like mechanically?
Well, it was a direct pushback against the whole clash of civilizations theory that was popular then, the idea that the West and the Islamic world were just doomed to fight forever. Khatami was saying, no, we can have totally different religions and political systems, but we can still talk to each other. We can engage with mutual cultural respect instead of just ideological warfare.
So this brings us to the ultimate paradox of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
Khatami is holding out this olive branch. He wants dialogue. And the U.S., technically, wants regional stability. So why didn't they just, I don't know, sit down in a room, freeze the sanctions, and work it out?
That is the tragedy of the 1990s right there. And the dossier points to one overarching theme: entrenched mistrust.
Just way too much baggage.
Unbelievable amounts of baggage. When Khatami talked about dialogue, Washington heard him, sure, but they filtered it through a very dark lens.
Because they're still seeing the hostage crisis.
Exactly. They aren't looking at a philosopher. They're looking at a system that held 52 Americans hostage for over a year. There was this baked-in assumption in Washington that the Iranian regime was fundamentally deceptive.
Like Khatami might be nice, but the regime is tricking us.
Right. They thought it was a trap.
But the sources show that Iran felt the exact same way about the U.S.
Oh, totally. The historical trauma was mutual. While the U.S. is remembering 1979, Tehran is remembering 1953, when the CIA literally overthrew their democratically elected prime minister to protect oil interests.
Right. And then there's the really awful event from 1988.
Yeah, Flight 655.
The civilian airliner.
Yes. In July 1988, the USS Vincennes, an American warship, mistakenly identified an Iran Air passenger jet as a military plane and shot it down.
Over the Persian Gulf.
Yeah. 290 civilians died, and Washington called it a tragic accident in the fog of war. But you have to realize, from the Iranian perspective,
They thought it was on purpose.
they viewed it as a deliberate act of violence by an imperial power trying to force them to surrender. So when the U.S. talked about stability, Iran also assumed it was a trap.
It's like, imagine two people sitting at a table trying to shake hands.
Okay.
But they're both wearing these heavy suits of armor, and they both have friends standing right behind them, literally pulling their arms back.
That is exactly what was happening. And
Right.
we should probably identify who those friends pulling the arms back were.
The hardliners.
The hardliners, on both sides. They held the actual structural power.
Let's talk about the Iranian side first,
Yeah.
because I think people might assume that, oh, Khatami is president, he could just change foreign policy.
Right.
But the Iranian government structure is way more complicated than that.
It's a dual system. So Khatami won the popular vote, right? He controlled the civilian ministries, the economy. He was the public face.
But he wasn't the ultimate boss.
Not at all. The real structural power, the military, intelligence, the courts, the Revolutionary Guards, they all answered to the unelected supreme leader and the clerics.
And for those guys, being anti-American wasn't just a policy.
No, it was their entire brand. It was a pillar of their revolutionary legitimacy. If Khatami makes peace with America, the hardliners lose their best enemy.
They lose their boogeyman.
Exactly. So whenever Khatami tried to actually change policy, the unelected branches would just pull the levers of power and block him.
Wow. But I mean, the U.S. had its own version of this, right? It wasn't like Bill Clinton could just snap his fingers and cancel the sanctions.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
In the U.S., being tough on Iran was basically the one thing everyone agreed on. It was a deeply bipartisan issue.
Right. Congress passed the 1996 Act.
Exactly. You had defense officials, massive lobbying groups, politicians from both parties. Lifting those sanctions would have required immense political capital.
Capital that Clinton just didn't have.
Or wasn't willing to spend. In the 90s, looking soft on Iran was just electoral suicide in America.
Oh, so you have these two executives, Khatami and Clinton, who maybe see this little crack of light, this window.
But the domestic forces surrounding them simply wouldn't let them open it. The factions that benefited from the fighting basically had veto power.
Man. So to kind of summarize where this dossier leaves us,
Yeah.
the 1990s were just this tragic stalemate.
Yeah.
Washington spends the first half of the decade building this totally unprecedented economic cage with dual containment and those massive sanctions. And then Khatami's election in 97 offers this incredible but super fleeting escape hatch, this philosophical change in tone.
But neither side could walk through the hatch.
Because of the history.
Yeah.
And because the hardliners wouldn't let them.
Exactly. And, we should remind everyone as we're analyzing this, we are strictly looking at the dossier. Our goal isn't to assign blame to the Americans or the Iranians.
Right, we're not taking sides here.
We're just observing how historical trauma has this undeniable gravitational pull. The coups, the hostages, the downed airliner, these weren't just history to them.
They were active forces paralyzing the present.
Perfectly said.
It's a heavy realization. But honestly, it's so essential if you want to understand how these countries interact even today. The past literally dictates the future.
It really does.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We've gone through the mechanics of embargoes, dual governments, and civilizational dialogue.
It's been a great discussion.
It has. But before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thing to mull over today. We started by imagining that brief window opening between two rivals. Just think about the mechanics of what we just discussed. When two nations have spent decades building up such deep, entrenched mistrust, is a change in rhetoric, no matter how eloquent it is, ever truly enough to break the ice? Or does real diplomacy require one side to take a terrifying, unilateral leap of faith?
Yeah.
Like, do you have to tear down your own wall first without any guarantee that the other side will do the same?
Yeah.
Something to think about.